When previewing 2024 in January, I thought that the lineup of games we were going to get just didn't look good. It looked like developers and publishers were avoiding 2024 altogether. Partially I was right, as 2025 is already looking stacked with Grand Theft Auto 6, Doom the Dark Ages, Mafia the Old Country, and Hello Kitty Island Adventure all set to release this year. But I was also very wrong, because 2024 was an amazing year for games. Pretty much every major release from companies not named Ubisoft was a financial and critical hit, while we also got a plethora of great indie games that year after year continue to provide innovative and exciting experiences. In this video, I'll be ranking my top 10 games of the year. I will not be including remasters or expansions, which means no Shadow of the Erdtree and no Persona 3 Reload. Without further ado, here are my 10 favorite games of the year, beginning with a few honorable mentions. Thank Goodness You're Here is not a very long game, very short on actual gameplay, but it manages to accomplish something that nowadays is very rare in the gaming industry. It's actually quite funny.
Yes, it happened again. Good grief, lad. The front door is right there.
You play as a random person trying to pass the time who constantly finds himself in wacky situations inspired by older British comedies that I've never actually watched. It's a very charming game that I wish was longer. While this next game is also light on the gameplay side, its tone is on the complete opposite end of the spectrum compared to Thank Goodness You're Here, as it's a psychological horror game. In Mouthwashing, you are stuck in the middle of space with 4 other people, and your biggest threat isn't the lack of oxygen or food or anything like that, but it's everyone's constantly declining mental state. Mouthwashing grabs your attention instantly and doesn't let go till the very end. It's a game that invites you to think about everything going on in the ship, and I think that its story will live rent-free in my head for a long time. That and its stupidly vibrant and silly community that categorically refuses to acknowledge that Mouthwashing is a horror game. I don't usually see a reason to include live service games in these types of lists. Games like 2K and COD or EA Sports FC are among my most played each year, but that doesn't necessarily make them good. They're a platform for me to hang out with friends or compete with other people online, but they don't offer anything exciting in terms of gameplay, story, or innovation. Helldivers 2, however, is a live service game that's unlike anything else in the genre. Its large-scale battles against hundreds of enemies is a gameplay experience that you cannot find anywhere else, except for maybe the jankier Earth Defense Force games. Helldivers 2 gameplay requires strategy while also providing a lot of memorable, unscripted moments that range from hilarious to cinematic. All of this while also not having predatory microtransactions, and it's still getting major updates. If you want to make a live service game, Helldivers 2 should be the gold standard. I'm not the biggest fan of platformers, but when they're done right, it's hard not to appreciate them. Astrobot is by far the best 3D platformer released after Mario Odyssey, and not because it's the only 3D platformer released after Mario Odyssey. Astrobot is such an exceptionally well-designed game. It always has a new idea to throw at you, and they all work brilliantly. The love the devs had for all of PlayStation's IPs is palpable, especially in the few levels designed with certain franchises in mind. It only took 30 years, but Sony finally found its mascot. So far in this list, I've really liked the games themselves, but I'm generally not a fan of the genre they belong to. Now, I don't know exactly how to describe I Am Your Beast genre, but consider me a fan.
Motherfuckers wanna make us
I Am Your Beast is a quick-paced first-person shooter where your goal is to complete all of your objectives in the least amount of time. It's super hot without the slow motion. I Am Your Beast's gameplay loop is easily one of the year's best, and it's accompanied by a story that is a lot more engaging than it had any right to be. Seriously, just 3 voice actors performing, accompanied by fancy subtitles of what they're saying. There's no other visuals to support the cutscenes, yet the game's story is more interesting than the stories of most AAA games released this year. I Am Your Beast is probably the least well-known game on the list, and if it looks even mildly interesting to you, you should probably give it a go. The Plucky Squire is by far the most creative game of the year. You play as the hero of a children's book that has the power to exit and re-enter said book at will. This allows him to impact the world of the book using objects from outside of it, and it all makes for a fantastic experience. Solving the game's puzzles is a ton of fun, and every time you think the game might be getting stale, the Plucky Squire gives you a new ability that keeps the gameplay fresh and exciting to play. I'd also be remiss not to mention the game's brilliant art style that accurately represents both the real and the children's book world. I still think there's untapped potential to the Plucky Squire's core concept, so I'd love to see more of it. Trust me, if you're one of the 3 people that hasn't played Balatro, you really shouldn't. I mean, this game has one of the worst elevator pitches, being a roguelike poker game. I could be hacking and slashing my way through Hades or Dead Cells, or I could be max paining my way through Ocho, but no, I won't play all of these games so I can play the silly poker roguelike. Yeah, right. Anyways, I probably have more hours played in Balatro than all the other games I mentioned combined. The game has a way of completely absorbing you in trying to beat the next ante, in trying to perfect your build, and in pushing you to beat the game in harder and harder difficulties. I rarely play roguelikes after beating them for the first time, but Balatro had me beating it in its 8th and highest difficulty setting. This game requires just the right amount of skill and luck, and it's way better than it had any right to be. I miss this type of game. Space Marine 2 is a PS3 game in all the best ways. It has a campaign that doesn't overstay its welcome, with a simple but very satisfying gameplay loop, and it's all playable in co-op. Space Marine 2 is a third-person shooter with a heavy emphasis on melee combat. The game's combat weaves a fine line of being challenging enough that it doesn't get boring, but easy enough for you to feel like the super soldier you're supposed to be. Parrying in this game is one of the most fun actions you can do in any game of 2024. I have no idea what's going on in the story, but it doesn't really matter. We need more games like Space Marine 2. The game doesn't try to do a lot of things, instead it focuses on a very tight combat loop, and the results are wonderful. Bonus points for having these badass suits of armor, and having the least intimidating middle-aged men wear them. Playing through Black Myth Wukong, I really wasn't enjoying its first chapter. For some inexplicable reason, the game throws you a difficulty spike unlike anything you'll find till closer to the end game, right in its first hour. But after I got past that early hump, I was treated with one of the best games of the year. The game becomes better the more you play it, as you unlock more powers and abilities, making for probably the best combat of any game released in 2024. Before its release, this game had all the makings of being a rip-off similar to the likes of the day before. It was made by an unknown studio and it generally looked too good to be true. But the game plays as good as it looks, and if it wasn't for its mediocre level design, it could have easily been at the top of this list. Prior to this game's launch, as much as I loved Machine Games' other work, I thought there was no way they could make an Indiana Jones game work. Indy is not a cold-blooded killer like Nathan Drake or Lara Croft. You can't have him mowing down hundreds of people to get the ancient relic he's looking for, and the Indiana Jones movies simply have way too much downtime for them to work as a game, I thought. On an unrelated side note, here's my face reveal. Indiana Jones and the Great Circle not only works, but it's a masterclass in game design and pacing. The solution to making an Indiana Jones game wasn't making an Uncharted reskin, but making a Dishonored game sprinkled with Uncharted's exploration and puzzles. You'll be stealthing around a variety of sandboxes, exploring the secrets they hold beneath them, while also completing side quests that are unique in the sense that they have near indistinguishable quality from the main missions. The game's story is also excellent, mixing in great writing, interesting characters, and surprisingly funny moments. Machine Games bounced right back from the fiasco that was Youngblood, and I can't wait to see what the future holds for them. When making this list, it was really hard for me to choose between number 1 and 2. Both of them took over my life in a way that games rarely do, and I could easily change my opinion on which one deserves the top spot. But for now, I think this will have to do. Metaphor ReFantasio sits comfortably among giants like EA Sports FC and Kingdom Hearts 0.2 Birth by Sleep: A Fragmentary Passage for one of the worst named games of all time, but it's so good that I can't even be mad. Metaphor is a JRPG where your main goal is to gather enough votes from the public to reinstate the comatose prince as the king of the land after the previous king was murdered. The game is the usual fare for anybody that has played a Persona game, which I very much love, as you spend half your time battling a variety of creatures and dungeons, and the other half forging interpersonal relationships with your ever-expanding crew of misfits. What made Metaphor stand out to me was its terrific writing. What it lacked in flair and style compared to the Persona games, Metaphor made up with the best story I've experienced in an Atlus game. Special props go to Luis, who probably became my favorite villain in any game ever. They say that a good villain isn't in the right, but he has to believe that he is, and Luis is the perfect embodiment of that. He has his own twisted morals, and he constantly challenges the hero's ideals in a gaslighty way. What a fantastic game. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth was an experience that very few others have matched in all my years of gaming. I'm usually very reluctant to include remakes in this sort of list, but I mean, this is how the original Final Fantasy VII looked and played, and this is Rebirth. They're completely different games, and what I love about Rebirth is that some of the characters themselves realize that they're in a remake, and you are constantly getting teased about the story of the original being changed. Genuinely, having the original Final Fantasy VII spoiled for me made Rebirth so much better, because it made me invested in the journey of trying to change the story. This game had me in an emotional chokehold, especially for its final 10 hours, and there's simply not a lot of games that can do that to me. This story is interspersed by some excellent gameplay where you fight a wide variety of enemies with your giant sword, all while the game's brilliant soundtrack is blaring in the background. And let's not forget about Queen's Blood, which on its own could have easily made it into the list. I loved every bit of Rebirth, and I really hope the third part of the remake can deliver the same level of quality. And these were my top 10 games of 2024. Do you agree with the list? Probably not, but that's what the comments are for. So I'll be interested to hear your picks for Game of the Year. In the meantime, if you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing as it's free and it really helps the channel out, and as always, see you in the next one.